Good evening, everybody, and thank you all for coming out for another fun-filled series at Partners. Sorry, my speaker was doing something funny. We're gonna try that intro again, just to be on the safe side. Good evening, everybody, and thank you all for being here tonight with us for another series of Partners Cleveland. I am none other than Rabbi Pinchas Landis, who I believe you all know. If you don't know me, you're lucky, and we are excited for yet another series. I'm actually completely thrilled about the series, not for the least of which is the reason that I just love Jewish history. For those of you who know me, you know that I refer to myself as a barstool Jewish historian. I don't know exactly what that means, but I figure like Barstool Sports, like I'm a barstool historian, so that's my new title for myself. So I love teaching history. I think history, and especially Jewish history, is one of the best tools for many different things that we're going to delve into tonight. So first off, there in the chat box, I put a outline if you'd like to follow along, where you'll have the outline, some of the sources for what we're talking about tonight. And this is going to be a series that I for one am very excited about. The plan is, and as we all know, the Yiddish saying, "A Mensch tschacht und Gott lacht," which means a man plans and God laughs. But nonetheless, the plan for this is that we will start tonight, making our way through Jewish history, and the series will end when we get up to 2021 or 2022, depending on whatever year it is when we end. That's when the series will end. The plan is to take this up to modern times and to continue this as a Tuesday night class. When we start doing partners in person once again, maybe we'll move it to Wednesday night. We'll figure that out when we get there. But in the meantime, the plan is for this to be an ongoing class and to cover all of Jewish history from the beginning until modern times. So with no further ado, let's delve right in. Again, I want to welcome everyone who's just signing in, who's here with us on Zoom, who's with us on Facebook or YouTube. And of course, those who are tuning in later on TorahAnytime.com, where all of our lectures are always available. So with no further ado, let's jump into the Jewish Destiny series. Now, you'll see in a moment why the title is very fitting for the discussion of Jewish history. First off, for those of you who are familiar with other famous Jewish historians, you'll know that one of the most famous of American Jewish historians is none other than Rabbi Beryl Wein, who entitled his foundation the Destiny Foundation. Now, the reason for that is because the idea of, it's been said by many, I don't remember if he coined the phrase or someone else coined the phrase, but Jewish history is Jewish destiny. That when we're studying Jewish history, we're really studying the destiny of the Jewish people. And if you spend this next few moments with me tonight, you'll understand exactly what that phrase means, and you'll know how this tour that we're going to take over the next several weeks together is not just a tour through Jewish history, it's a tour of Jewish destiny, of Jewish understanding, of truly understanding what it means to be a Jew. So for those of you who just completed the 10 steps program with us, that was 10 steps to the new you, 10 steps to what it means to be a Jew. If you were with us before that, for you might be a heretic if we covered the 13 principles of Jewish faith. That was another way of looking at what it means to be a Jew. This is going to be the Jewish story. And through the Jewish story, we'll truly cover, God willing, what it means to be a Jew. So with no further ado, let's jump into the question as to why in the world we should study history. Now, I assume if you came here tonight, you are like me and you at some level like history, or you just like me for some reason. You came to hear me speak. I think it's probably the former, not the latter. But you know, some people, let's face it, they hear the term history and they all of a sudden have these negative flashbacks back to high school or to middle school about memorizing names, dates, places, and nothing interesting or exciting about it. So first of all, let me get something clear. This is not your high school history class. This is going to be quite different, I believe, than many other history classes you've ever experienced. Hopefully, that's my goal at least. And we're going to try and give something quite different. But the question is, again, why should we do it? If our memory from high school is that history is just names, dates, places, like that old question they always stumped you with in American history as to when was the War of 1812. My cousin Brent always got that wrong, by the way. And if you know my cousin Brent, you understand why. But, you know, who's buried in Grant's tomb, right? All these great history questions. But why should we do it? Why should we study Jewish history? So I think as a backdrop for the question, we have to answer another question. And that is, why in the world are we on this planet to begin with? Why did the Almighty and his infinite knowledge, his infinite wisdom create mankind? I mean, you got to think he was pretty well off before, man. Like, what do you need us for? What do you need the stress and the trouble that we've given him throughout time? And many of those stresses we're going to cover here in this program. Well, what do you need to create us for? So the famous Jewish philosopher and Kabbalist, Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, who Jerry Harris is a big expert on, wrote in his monumental work, Mesilas Yesharim, The Path of the Just. The Path of the Just is known as the quintessential book of the Musar movement, of the great movement of Jewish ethics. And he opened up the book with the following words. He said, Hine ma shaharonu chachamim zichronu livrachahu. This is what our rabbis taught. Sha'adam lo nivra, that a person was not created, or the only reason a person was created, ella lehisaneg al Hashem, ulahanos miziv shchinaso, to get pleasure from Hashem and to bask in his presence. Says shizehu hatanug ha'amiti, because this is the ultimate enjoyment. V'ha'idun agadol mikol ha'adanim, and this is the best enjoyment of any possible enjoyment that mankind can enjoy. So Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto says this world is full of enjoyments. And by the way, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch and others write, we are supposed to, as Jews, enjoy the world. We are not as an ascetic people. We don't believe in abstinence. We don't believe in staying away from the world. We believe in sanctifying the world. We believe in enjoying good food, but making sure it's kosher and making sure it's tied properly. We believe in sitting down to a nice meal, but before that meal, we say a blessing of please. And afterwards, we say a blessing of thank you. We believe in looking around the world and enjoying what we find. I'm reading an amazing biography right now of my Rosh Hashiva, Rav Yaakov Moshe Kolevsky of blessed memory, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, written by none other than Cleveland's own Hebrew Academy graduate, Rabbi Chil Spiro. And it talks about how my Rosh Hashiva would always walk around and just marvel at the universe, just marvel at nature, just marvel at the trees, just marvel. You would see him just daydreaming, walking around, just enjoying the world, because that is what it means to be a Jew. That's enjoyment. But what's the ultimate enjoyment? The ultimate enjoyment is lehisanok al Hashem lahanos miziv shchinaso, to have enjoyment from the Almighty and to bask in His presence. The ultimate place of a Jew in this world is to enjoy this world. We are here to enjoy the world. That's it. If you only learn one thing tonight, if they say, what did you learn from Rabbi Landis? Say, I learned that a Jew has to enjoy the world. And that's true. But the ultimate enjoyment in the world is a connection with the Almighty and to bask in the glory of His presence and to bask in that relationship. That is the ultimate enjoyment, which comes far heads and shoulders above any other enjoyment in the world. So that's why we're here. That's why we are on this planet. That's why mankind is here. And specifically, that's why the Jews are here. And we were chosen, as we'll see, to help the world to enjoy this planet that we are on. That's the reason. But we do it through relationship with the Almighty. And one of the ways that we can understand that relationship is by understanding what came before us, by understanding the actions of our antecedents, the actions of our forefathers, the history of our people. That is truly how we can understand how to best enjoy the world. First of all, in part, we can do it through, the adage of that great Jewish scholar, none other than Albert Einstein. And, in his famous quote, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Right? So in other words, if you don't want to be insane, don't do the same thing over and over again. That's what Einstein teaches us. So the first thing you learn tonight is the purpose of a Jew is to enjoy this world. The second thing you learn tonight is how to not be insane. Right? So you can go tell your friends, hey, what'd you learn from Rabbi Landis? He taught us how not be insane. Wait, isn't he insane? Yes, he is. But anyways, so Einstein tells us the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. By learning history, we can see exactly how things were done in previous generations. We can see how the Doros HaRishonim, how the generations that came before us, we can see how they did things. We can see how they attempted to enjoy this world and get the ultimate pleasure from this world. And when they did it right, we can learn from them. And when they did it wrong, we can learn from them as well, learn what to avoid and learn what not to do. as I believe it's Rabbi Wein himself who says that he wishes that he could sit the whole world down and give them one good history lesson. Just one. That's all it would take. One good history lesson, right? And that's what we're trying to do here. Because through one good history lesson, we can learn so much about the pitfalls to avoid. Learn about the insanity to avoid. Mankind doing the same thing over and over and over again, as Einstein says, is pure insanity. Insanity. This is nothing to say about the Israeli elections. Okay, this is not a political statement. Having 5 elections in a row, well, it is insane. Okay, let's face it. Okay, but one of the ways that we can learn from that is to learn the story of the Jewish people. And probably one of my most favorite quotes of all time is said by actually a Gentile scholar, none other than George Santayana. Progress, far from consisting in change, depends on retentiveness. When change is absolute, there remains no being to improve and no direction is set for possible improvement. And when experience is not retained, as among savages, infancy is perpetual. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Right? Similar to Einstein. If you don't remember the past, you're condemned to repeat it. Meaning, repeat what? The mistakes of the past. As I always say, I used to always quote in the name of Tony Robbins, and then I found out that actually Nelson Mandela was the one who said it originally, who, is a great man in many ways, not a big friend of the Jews, but a great man nonetheless. And Nelson Mandela always said that there's no wins and losses. There are just wins and learning experiences. So the point of history is that we have those learning experiences. The Jewish people have been through so much through our 5,781 years on the map of the world, or that's really the mankind's map of the world, but the Jews are 3,000 years on the map of the world. We've been through so much. We've gone through so much. We've seen it all. We've done it all. And if we don't learn from it, it's insane. It's simple insanity. If the purpose of our place in this world is to have the ultimate enjoyment, the ultimate pleasure by basking in a relationship from the Almighty, that comes first and foremost from understanding what comes before us, from understanding who comes before us and what they did and what they tried and what worked and what failed, and taking what worked to make it better, and taking what failed and getting rid of it and learning from it and moving on. And that's, I believe, the point of studying history. As one of my other colleagues, who is also quite a historian, Rav Ken Spiro, always says, that teaching history or learning history is the best way to teach Jewish ethics, or as we say in Hebrew, Musar. It's the best way to really teach a person how to grow, or I would extend that a little bit to say it's the best way to teach Jewish philosophy. And that's what we're going to be doing here today. We're going to be delving in the Jewish story in order to figure out what is our purpose in the world and how do we do it properly. That's step number 1, and if you will, reason number 1 as to why we should learn Jewish history. Reason number 2. If we want to get the ultimate enjoyment out of this world, we have to first know where we fit into the world. Where are we on the map of history? How do we fit into the puzzle of Jewish history? So in order to understand that, I'd like to share with you a fascinating statement from the Talmud. The Talmud Tractate Sanhedrin, page 97a, says, Tan Debelio, Shisha Alafim Shana Hayu Alma, that the world as we know it will exist for 6,000 years. Shnei Alafim Tohu, 2,000 years of null and void. Shnei Alafim Torah, 2,000 years of Torah. And Shnei Alafim Yamos HaMashiach, and 2,000 years of the Messianic era. Ubavasenu Sharabu Yatsu Mehem Mash Yatsu. And through our many transgressions, what's past is past. Bygones are bygones. So the Talmud is saying something fascinating. The Talmud is saying that we actually have a blueprint for Jewish history. The blueprint is like this. 6,000 years is Jewish history. The first 2,000 years, null and void. Second 2,000 years, the 2,000 years of Torah. The third 2,000 years is the 2,000 years of the Messianic era. Now, this 6, as we know as Jews, and especially just coming off of Pesach and Passover and the Seder and all the numbers we saw in the Seder, we know that anytime we see numbers in Judaism and we see other similar numbers, there's a relationship. So the Talmud is saying that the map of Jewish history is 6,000 years, seemingly corresponding to what? By the way, if anyone has questions, as always, we'll pause about halfway through, and then, of course, take all the questions at the end. If in the meantime you have a question and you're afraid you'll forget it or I'll forget it or whatever, feel free to put it in the chat box, and hopefully I'll see it pop up on my screen. But what's another place where we see that concept of six? The 6 days of creation, right? We know that in the story of Bereshis, the beginning of the Torah, we have the story, and that's going to actually be next week's class. We're going to delve into that a bit, but we have the 6 days of creation. So says the Ramban, and says the Vilna Gaon, and say the great Kabbalists of Jewish history, that there is a parallel between these 6 days of creation and the 6,000 years of Jewish history. The Vilna Gaon goes on to say that Kaviyachol, on some level, one day in the Almighty's perspective is 1,000 years in our perspective. So therefore, when we talk about one day of creation by the Almighty, that means 1,000 years in mankind's time. So therefore, and he goes on to explain how there's a parallel between what happened on the first day of creation and what happened in the first millennium and what happened in the second day of creation and what happened in the second millennium and the third day of creation, the third millennium, so forth and so on. Now, if you do your math, that puts us somewhere, since we're in the fifth Jewish millennium, right, 5781, towards the end of the fifth Jewish millennium, the sixth Jewish millennium, that means we're holding by like Friday, about 4 o'clock. Everybody's rushing to take a shower before Shabbos, and you're heating up the challahs, and you're getting the cholent ready, right? That's where we are according to the Vilna Gaon on the map of world history, because the Kabbalists explain that this concept of 6,000 years interplays with the 6 days of creation, and they go into great depth as to explain how. We'll touch on a little bit next week's session, not too much because it's a little bit beyond my pay grade personally, but at least from our perspective, that's how we can understand Jewish history, or world history, if you will. World history is 6,000 years. And the idea is that the first 2,000 were null and void, right? Were null and void. The second 6,000, well, that corresponds to a specific event that we're going to talk about, I guess, 3 or 4 sessions from now, actually. We're going to meet a man by the name of Abram, who eventually became Avraham, who we know as Avram Ivri, Avram, the first Hebrew, our great patriarch. Now, what year was Avraham born on the Jewish calendar? Avram was born in the Jewish year 1948. Now, that's one of those strange coincidences in Jewish history that means absolutely nothing, but it's a lot of fun to throw around at a cocktail party, right? That Abraham was born in the Jewish year 1948, the modern day state of Israel was born in the secular 1948. Meaningless, but fascinating at a certain level. Kind of like if you would imagine that there's a concept of gematria, right? Gematria is part of the Jewish study of Kabbalah, and it's a relationship that every letter has a numeric value, and you can learn from the numeric value certain philosophical ideas. The most famous gematria that all of us know is that what is the gematria of the Hebrew word life? Chai, it's 18, right? That's why 18 is this big Jewish number. That's why every check you got for your bar mitzvah was in a denomination of 18, because the gematria, the numeric value of the word chai, which means life, is yud ches. Yud is 10, ches is 8, 18, right? So imagine for a moment that there is gematria in English, okay? So A would be 1, B would be 2, C would be 3, so forth and so on, right? Imagine for a moment. If you take the word G-O-D, right, the English word for the Almighty, the English word for God, and superimpose this gematria idea, you get the number 26, which is the exact same gematria as the Hebrew word Yud Hey Vav and Hey, right, Adoshem, that we say all the time when we pray. Meaningless, but great to throw around at cocktail parties. Again, there's no such thing as meaningless things, obviously, but again, hard to take the meaning there, but one of those just fun coincidences in Jewish history and philosophy. But be it as it may, back to our subject tonight is that Abraham was born in the Jewish year 1948, and as we'll discuss 4 weeks from now, became an official monotheist at the age of 52. That's what the Medrash tells us. The famous story of him smashing all his father's idols, that happened when he was 52 years old, which would, if you do your math, correspond to what year? The Jewish year 2000, beginning the 2,000 years of Torah. So when we talk about the first 2,000 years being the 2,000 years of null and void, that's the world before, so to speak, the Jewish people began. Once Abraham comes on the scene and becomes a monotheist, becomes an official monotheist through a defiant act against his father, against his culture, against the kingdom, against everything. Once he became that true level of a monotheist, at that point, that begins the 2,000 years of what we call the 2,000 years of Torah. because, at some level, Abraham, did Abraham learn Torah? Yeah, he learned Torah. Now, again, not Torah like you and I learned. He didn't have the Torah necessarily the way that you and I have it. But we see that there was a concept of he did some mitzvahs. He had the mitzvah bris milah, of circumcision, of pruv ruah, be fruitful, multiply, etc., right? To a certain extent, Abraham learned Torah. But that really begins the beginning of the development of Torah. As we'll see several weeks from now, what happens 2,000 years later? The Talmud is written down. Right? As we'll discuss, we get to the Talmud. The Talmud is essentially the court stenography of what happened in the great Babylonian and Israeli yeshivas, where they're talking about the Jerusalem Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud. The Talmud is written down roughly 2,000 years later, the year, give or take 250 of the Common Era, 300 of the Common Era. That's when the Talmud is written down, ending our 2,000 years of Torah. What happens next? The 2,000 years of the Messianic era. So what the Talmud is telling us is in that last set of 2,000 years, which we'll get to like 3 years from now, probably. Now, I don't know how long it'll be, but we'll get to it quite down the road. And that final 2,000 years, that's the Messianic era. Now, what does that mean? That means that the world is ready for Mashiach, that the world is ready for the Messiah. But that, as the Talmud says, because of our many transgressions, what's past is past, right? We miss many, many, many opportunities. Now, again, we'll talk about this a lot more later, but what's fascinating is that when we talk about the concept of a false Messiah, there was never a false Messiah before 2,000 years ago. Right? Jesus, okay, it's a debate exactly when he lived, if he really lived at the years, it was really born in the year 0 or not. We'll talk about it when we get to it. These are many of the fun things we're going to cover over here. But for sure, Rome doesn't become Catholic till the year 330, when Constantine becomes, the first Holy Roman Emperor, and making Rome Catholic. He goes back and forth for a few emperors. But when Rome becomes Catholic, that's when Christianity becomes a thing. Right? And that's already clearly well into this 2,000 years of the Messianic era. We're going to talk about somebody named Shimon Bar Yochai. Also, he was at the beginning of these 2,000 years. I'm sorry, not Shimon Bar Yochai, Shimon Bar Kokhba, who was a false Messiah, who was at the beginning of these 2,000 years. We're going to talk about Islam and Muhammad, who was not a Messiah per se, but also taking things a different direction. We're going to talk about Shabtai Tzvi. We're going to talk about Yaakov Frank, many famous false messiahs in Jewish history, all of them in the past 2,000 years, and these 2,000 years of the Messianic era. Now, it's partially a technicality. I have to be honest, just to be completely intellectually honest. It's partially a technicality because when we talk about Mashiach, and we've talked about this in several previous sessions, and we'll talk about it plenty more in this session, we're talking about the reinstitution of the Davidic monarchy in Israel. The Davidic monarchy in Israel only ended circa the year 420 before the Common Era. The last of the kings, the king Tzidkiyahu was the last of the kings of Judah. He was taken into the Babylonian exile. Nebuchadnezzar destroys the first temple in the year 420 before the Common Era. So it's about, give or take 600-700 years between the destruction of the first temple and the beginning of the Messianic era. Now, that being said, we do have the second temple in between, which will take many, many sessions for us to understand, so we'll get to that. But that's just how it breaks up. We have the 2,000 years essentially before the Jewish people. We have the 2,000 years of the development of the Jewish people, and we would have what I call the 2,000 years of the actualization of the Jewish people when we're supposed to finally bring the world to its fruition. We've already made it, 1,781 years through that process, haven't quite gotten there yet, and hopefully we will soon. Hopefully we'll get there soon, because I don't want to say time's running out, but that's, it's kind of funny because you might say, so 1 second. So the Jews are like those doomsday people and Nostradamus giving all these predictions about when the world's going to come to an end. No, that's not what the Talmud says. The Talmud doesn't say if the year 6,000 arrives and God forbid Mashiach's not here yet, that the world comes to an end, something's wrong, the world blows up. It's all, no. This is one approach to this. There are other approaches, as we'll see and as we go on, as to how to look at the total calendar and the total years of Jewish history. And I'll just throw in one more thing to knock your socks off, that there are many great commentators who say, and Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky being one of them, who say that our calendar as we have it was specifically mixed up at certain points. So even though we call this year 5781, it's not necessarily 5,781 years from creation, right? Okay, we'll talk about this more as we go on. It's going to play a role in many many parts. But be it as it may, it does give us a concept. And the concept is what's important here more than the years of the concept. Because I told you this was not going to be a class where we just sit here and memorize names, dates, and places. So we got to get the concept of the lesson. And the lesson is that before monotheism comes into the world, before Avram Avinu, before Abraham comes into the world's tohu. The world is void. The world is empty. It's a world of, at some, many levels, nothingness, right? Once we have Avraham in the world and we have the development of Torah, the development of the Jewish people, the spreading of monotheism throughout the world, that begins essentially the development of the world as we know it, the development of Torah. Once the Torah reaches its maturity and is fully developed, then we're ready for the Jewish people to reach its actualization. And we're towards the end of that process. We are towards the end of that process. And in many ways we are, as we're going to see. We're going to see it a little bit tonight, but for sure we're going to see it more in depth as the weeks and sessions go on. So that is reason number 2 as to why it's important to study Jewish history, because we have to know where we fit into the puzzle. We have to have this understanding of what's it mean that we're at the end of the last third? What's it mean that we're getting close to the end of the process? What does that mean for us? And that's part of what we can take out of Jewish history. Now, one interesting aside before we pause for some questions, that the Vilna Gaon and other Kabbalists explain that based on this idea that we alluded to, the idea of the 6 years of creation correspond to the 6 days of creation correspond to the 6,000 years of Jewish history, that essentially you can find all of Jewish history, all of world history in the Torah. Okay, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. I'll just throw that out there. I'll hang that out there while we pause for questions. So let's jump to the audience for some questions. I see some came here in the chat box. Let me just take a quick look over here. So Joanne, who came up with 6,000 years? Was it the rabbis, or is it from a prophet and then extrapolated? It's a rabbinic statement. This is a statement from the Talmud. It's Tana Debei Eliyahu. So it's a rabbinic statement because it's in the Talmud, but it is attributed to Elijah the prophet. So the answer is yes, the rabbis and prophets, right? The Tana Debei Eliyahu is the medrash that we have that is attributed to Elijah the prophet. So that's the source of this number 6,000 years being the blueprint of history. So we have Deanne gave us some great quotes here. First of all, one from Tehillim, right? From Psalms, where we say 1,000 years in your eyes is like yesterday, right? That's the same concept. That 1,000 years for the Almighty is like one day for 1,000 years for mankind is like one day for the Almighty. And we'll talk about it a little bit more next week when we talk about creation. And then we have Rashi's interpretation, which thank you, Deanne, for giving it to us there. That essentially speaks out this idea. So very, very good points. Any other questions before we move on? Yeah, go ahead, Joanne.
When you started talking about gematria, I was remembering the book, The Bible Code.
1 second, I don't have my speaker turned on. I'm sorry. I'm gonna 1 second here. There's a technical error on my part. I have my microphone says my speaker, and that's just not gonna work. Go ahead, try it again. What's your question? Okay.
So when you were talking a little bit about gematria, I was remembering the book, The Bible Code, that was published, I don't know, like 20 years ago or something.
Yeah, give or take.
When I read it, it really felt like the author some things made sense, and some things I felt that he was looking for connections to make something work. I guess what's your thoughts on that book and history, on Jewish history, and what's kind of the thought, I guess the consensus among, the rabbinic consensus,
Sure.
Or was there one?
Yeah, there's never one, because as we all know,
There's
2 Jews, 3 opinions.
Right.
As when we talk about the fast day of the 10th of Teves and the time of the Ptolemaic Empire, again, several weeks down the road, but we'll talk about the concept of what we call the Targum Shivim, the translation of the Septuagint, as it's called in Latin. The translation is 70 rabbis or 72 rabbis, which we say one of the miracles that happened at that time is that all the rabbis were put into separate rooms and came up with the exact same translation, with some calculated mistranslations put in. And I always say that's not a miracle. You put 72 rabbis in 72 different rooms, you get them all to agree on something. It's not a miracle. Put 72 rabbis in the same room and get them to agree on something, and that would be a miracle. But yeah, so the Bible code. So just a quick 30-second explanation for those who don't remember the fad, because in many ways it was a fad. The Bible codes were a the theory, or the we'll call it a theory, that any work could possibly have codes going through. In other words, if I would open up Merchant of Venice by William Shakespeare, and I could probably find certain words in code. By code, I mean by skipping, let's say 10 letters and finding my name, right? Pinchas, separated by 10 letters. Wow, that's my name in code. That's the rough concept of finding things in code. The original concept of the Bible codes, and this is a very, 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 very old idea. The idea of Bible codes is very old, mentioned by, for sure, the what we call the Achronim, the latter commentators. I think even some of the Rishonim, some medieval commentators already referred to it. So as far as the general consensus, if you will, of the quote Bible codes as a concept, it's a kosher concept. In other words, the idea that you can find things sort of under the surface of the words of the Torah and the letters of the Torah, that's a valid idea. And there are the Dasakanim Balatosos, a lot of his commentary, which he is a Rishon, medieval commentator. A lot of his commentary is even based on this rough concept, more gematrias, but a little bit also going into the realm of what we call codes. So the general idea is an ancient one. It's not a new idea that you can find codes in the Torah. What was fascinating, and the ones who really made it famous, was not really, I mean, the book made it more popularized in the whole world, right? I think it was a New York Times bestseller, if I remember correctly. But Esha Torah really made this very popular, because Esha Torah took this concept, and really the original discovery seminars, if for those of you who ever attended, I know my father attended one going back probably 20-something years. But the original discovery seminars that Esha Torah did, they had a lot of focus on the Bible codes, and the really some like you said, Joanne, some of the really breathtaking things that you would find in the codes, you would find you would find that there were very significant people mentioned in the Torah and intersecting with ideas that happened at their time. Right, things like that, and for something to be statistically significant, I don't know if we have any students of statistics here. Oh, my father was a math major in school, so I don't know if my dad wants to chime in, but for something to be statistically significant, meaning worthy of writing a paper on, well, as we know, you can write a paper on anything, but for something to be really significant as a paper, I think it's something like 1 in 100 or 1 in 500, right? For it to be what we call statistically significant. That means if something has a 1 in 500 chance of happening, and it happens, it is what we call statistically significant. And many of those things, and that they found in the Bible codes, again, these finding things in code, and Nomi, I think, posted an article there for people who want more information. They were, things that had a 1 in 64,000 chance of happening. In other words, the fact, you can find a code in anything, like I said. I'm sure we could find codes in Shakespeare, but probably separated by 10,000 letters, right? But here in the Bible codes, it was separated by 10 letters, by 5 letters, by 15 letters, and spelling out names, and that's where it became statistically significant. So again, the general concept is an old kosher Jewish concept going back thousands of years. That book, from what I remember, and I don't think I ever read it. I definitely saw it. I definitely skimmed through it and flipped through it. But as you said, he tried to kind of do his own thing with it to a certain extent, and try to find his own things and use his own computer programming, and it went in some wacky directions, right? It went in some, from what I remember. So and I think the general consensus of that book was a lot of rabbis were not excited about it, because they took something that, like I said, was sort of an age-old tradition, an age-old philosophy and concept, and he took it to, I don't want to say an illogical conclusion, because in many ways it's a logical conclusion, but he took it in a whole different direction, much further than people had taken it before, trying to predict the future, if I remember correctly. And therefore the concept, kosher. The book, not recommended. So, okay. And I think Nomi, like I said, post an article there for anyone who wants to, look at it more in depth. And also Deanne gives a source there for it too, just some more concepts of the Bible codes. Again, something you can definitely, there's a lot more literature. By the way, Esha Torah doesn't use it anymore, because so many people started debunking in different ways. Again, the debunks can be debunked, but once they have to debunk a debunk, it's not a very strong argument, So Esha Torah really stopped using it for the discovery seminar. Okay, any other questions, comments before we continue? Okay, let's rock and roll. So we said so far two general reasons, two important ideas as to why a Jew should study history. Number one is to help us find our purpose in the world, which is to enjoy this world and to be able to look at both the successes and build on them and the mistakes and learn from them of the previous generations so that we can enjoy the world in a better way. And we also have to figure out where we fit in. We fit into that 6,000 year process, so to speak, where we fit into the puzzle of Jewish history, again, with creation being the basic model and the 6 days of creation expanding into the 6,000 years of Jewish history. I saved the best for last because this is the reason why Pinchas Landis loves Jewish history. This is the reason why it speaks to me. And for different people, they always say different strokes, different folks, different strokes, different folks, however they say that line. But there's when you talk about the concept of emunah, of having faith in the Almighty, having faith in the Torah, having faith and belief in the Torah, for different people, it comes in different ways. Like I had one of my great Rebbeim, Rav Nachman Buhlman, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, who my parents had the pleasure to meet. We had a Shabbos dinner with him, a beautiful Shabbos dinner in Jerusalem with him once, Yerushalayim. But he he always was not crazy about what we would call biblical proofs. Not necessarily for sure the codes he didn't like, but even like biblical proofs. Like for example, in this week's Parsha, we're going to read Parsha Shmini this week. And Parsha Shmini has the kosher laws in it. All the laws of what animals are kosher, what animals are not kosher, that, fins and scales and chewing cud and split hooves and all those fun things. And the Torah does something fascinating. And that is it tells us the 4 animals in the world for all of history that only have one kosher sign, right? The animal tells us that a camel, hare, hyrax, and pig are the 4 animals that only have one kosher sign, meaning the camel, hare, and hyrax all chew their cud, and the pig has a split hoof. Right? Only those 4 animals. Every single other animal in the world either has neither or has both and is kosher. Right? So every other animal either has split hooves and chews its cud and therefore is kosher, or doesn't have split hooves and doesn't chew its cud and therefore is not kosher. These are the only 4 animals that have one kosher sign and not the other. Now, if you were writing the Torah, and you wanted this book to be accepted as truth for all of eternity, for all of history, would you, sitting in Mesopotamia, anywhere from, the biggest of Bible critics puts the dating of the Torah is 2,000 years ago. We say 3,000 years ago at Mount Sinai, but anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, depending on what school of thought you go with, would you have written something in there that says there's only 4 animals in the world that either there's only 3 that chew their cud and don't have a split hoof, and 1 that has a split hoof and doesn't chew its cud? Would you have written such a thing in a book 2,000 years ago, sitting somewhere in Mesopotamia or in the Levant or wherever it was? No, because why would you write something that could be so easily disproven if you don't have the knowledge of the whole entire world? I mean, let's face it. Even if you want to say someone wrote the Bible 2,000 years ago sitting in the Levant, that person did not know that America existed, right? This is way before Christopher Columbus, America Vespucci, Lewis and Clark, way before all those guys. No one knew that the Native Americans were there yet. No one knew. No one knew there was this whole half of the world that was undiscovered. So why in the world would you write, there's only 4 such animals in the whole entire world? Unless you had knowledge of the whole entire world, right? So we see from that, it must be, we can deduce that the author of this book must have had knowledge of the whole entire world. Okay, this is what we call a proof. Proof to the divinity of the Torah. My Rebbe Rav Buhlman Zatzal always said, proof, shmoofs, it's baby stuff, right? You sit down and you learn some Torah and you learn Talmud and you get into the depths of the Torah and you have no doubt that the Almighty gave it, right? That's how he looked at it. In other words, he said the whole point of these quote unquote proofs is just to get someone interested, get someone in the door. But once they start really learning Torah in depth, you have no questions anymore. You have no questions about the divinity of it, about the divine nature, about the authenticity of it, because the truth and beauty of it just comes out as you study it deeper and deeper. And that's what he used to say. So in short, what he was saying is that his emunah, his faith in the Almighty, his faith in the Jewish people, his faith in the Torah came through the learning of Torah. Okay? That was Rav Buhlman. I remember having this discussion once with Chuck Whitehill, who many of you know from right here in Cleveland. Chuck told me once, what does it for him? Science, right? The study of science and the amazing, the amazing nature of science. Again, I'm not a big scientist, so I can't explain as well as he probably could, but just the how you take the Earth, and if the Earth is like a few feet closer to the sun or a few feet further away, we'd either fry up or freeze. And you look at the exacting nature of things throughout nature and just the miraculous things that go on. That's what does it for him. So for some people, it's learning Torah. For some people, it's science. For Pinchas Landis, it's Jewish history. Right? The study of Jewish history, which is part of the studying of Torah, by the way. There's an aspect of Torah study, but it's the study of Jewish history. That's what does it for me. That's what convinces me that I'm right? I know I'm right. Right? How do I know I'm right? Because I study history. What do I mean by that? So Rav Yaakov Emden, who was a great 17th century German, 18th, he's born in the 17th century, late 1600s, but was a rabbi in the 1700s, 18th century in Germany. So he wrote a beautiful commentary to the prayer book, a commentary to the Siddur. And in the introduction to his commentary to the Siddur, he's debating and discussing the concept of miracles, the concept of all the amazing miracles that have happened throughout Jewish history. And he says, what's the biggest, greatest, most magnificent miracle that has ever happened in Jewish history? And he goes through them all, many of which we just discussed a week and a half ago. He says, was it the 10 plagues? No, it wasn't the 10 plagues. He says, was it the splitting of the sea? No, it wasn't the splitting of the sea. He says, was it the giving of the Torah in Sinai? No, it wasn't the giving of the Torah in Sinai. Was it the 10 constant miracles in the temple? No, it wasn't the 10 constant miracles in the temple, so forth and so on. So he says, what is the greatest miracle to happen on the map of world history? And he writes, and I have it translated here in English, by the life of my soul, when I contemplate these wonders of Jewish history, they appear greater to me than all the miracles and wonders that Hashem Yisbarach, that Hashem, blessed is he, performed for our forefathers in Egypt and the wilderness and the land of Israel, which means that Rav Yaakov Emden is saying that the fact that the Jewish people were still there in the 18th century in Germany, following Hashem's Torah, living lives as Jews, that is a greater miracle than everything that happened in Egypt. Then the manna that fell from heaven. Then the miraculous well that sustained the Jews, that gave the Jews water in the desert. Then the miracles that they saw in the temple. Then the conquest of Israel. Those are all great miracles. They don't hold a candle to the fact that there were still Jews observing the Torah in Germany in the 1700s. And if that miracle was great in the 18th century and the greatest miracle on the map of world history at that point, alachas kama v'kama, all the more so for us in the 21st century. The fact that in the 21st century, there are still Jews getting together on a Tuesday night during a pandemic, hopefully in the end of a pandemic, learning Torah together via a platform called Zoom, 3,000 years after the Torah was given, during the time period when we're counting the days from the Exodus of Egypt to the giving of the Torah on Sinai. That, my friends, is the greatest miracle ever on the map of world history. And that's why Pinchas Landis is a believer, right? That's where it comes from me. It's the study of this miracle. It's the study of everything that happened along the way, the trials and the tribulations that we went through. There are so many time periods when you're going to hear me say it many a times in this series. I'm going to say that if we survive this time period, we can survive anything. And I'm going to say it so many times because you think that Jews have it rough now, where we have this big fight, or I don't even call it a fight. We'll call it a big, discrepancies between Orthodox, conservative, Reform, Reconstructionists, Humanists, Nudists, right? We have all these different branches, and you have 1/3 of the Jewish people who are completely assimilated, and 1/3 who don't practice, and another third who, are somewhere on that spectrum. And you say, oh, it's so rough right now. It doesn't hold a candle to some of the things that we've been through. And we look at the troubles we have now, and I don't want to play them down. There's a lot of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is on the rise. I'm not going to deny it. But that means that compared to where it's been in history, it was about here. Now it's gone up to about here, where the median throughout the rest of world history was up here, right? And so we got a ways to go, and hopefully we won't get anywhere close to up here through what the Jews have gone through. So internal struggles, we've had them terribly. External struggles, they've been terrible. And still we're here. And still, we just sat down a week and a half ago and ate these burnt square crackers to celebrate our freedom. That's the greatest miracle ever. So at least for Pinchas Landis, if I ever need something to spark my emunah, I just I open up my great history books I have here, the ones that we're going to be using. I open up Josephus. I open up Barbara Tuchman. I open up, and again, secular Jewish history. It all plays in. It's all part of the same story, and that's where I, like Rav Yaakov Emden, get my faith from. So for me, studying history is knowing that there is an Almighty and knowing that we have a special relationship with Him and knowing that He brought us here for a reason. He brought the Jewish people here for a purpose. One of the amazing things that we see in the Torah is that Moshe Rabbeinu, that Moses, our teacher, in his last will and testament to the Jewish people in the book of Deuteronomy, gave us the blueprint for all of Jewish history. He gave us the blueprint for all of world history as we know it, for Jewish history as we know it. In the book of Deuteronomy, chapters 28 through 30, in those three chapters, Moshe makes a 6-part prophecy in his last will and statement to the Jewish people. He says that, okay, at this point, I'm not going into the land of Israel with you. You're going to go into the land of Israel. Joshua's going to take you in, but don't get too comfortable because you guys are going to screw up. Right? You're not going to make it so long. You're going to upset the Almighty, and you're going to, you're not going to make it there. So don't get too comfortable, and you're going to get kicked out. And when you get kicked out, you will be conquered by a nation who speaks a language that you don't understand. At that time, you're going to be scattered throughout the whole entire world. You're going to have no unification or organization from one group to the other. You're going to have people in Kazakhstan. You're going to have people in Spain. You're going to have people in America. You're going to have people in South Africa. You're going to have people in Antarctica and Australia and Arkansas and Alaska and all the other countries that start with A. Right? You're going to have people all over the place and nothing to tie them together. No central authority, no central organization. That in and of itself is miraculous enough. Then Moshe says, but don't worry, because you're going to survive all that. The Jewish people will survive all that. And in the end, you will return to the land of Israel and return to Hashem. Think about it for a moment. How many other ancient peoples were conquered and exiled from their land and survived? Name one. Okay, I don't know of any, but name one. I don't know. I don't think any. Maybe there's one, maybe there's two, maybe few I haven't thought about. But usually, when in antiquity, when a people was vanquished and conquered, and their land was taken over, that a couple things happened. First of all, they were decimated or tertiated, right? Decimated means that 1/10 were killed. It's Julie Kaufman, our dear friend, who's in the class. Once would always point out to me, Menachem Begin and Yehuda Avner in the fascinating book Prime Ministers talks about how when Menachem Begin first met with Jimmy Carter, he said during World War II our people were tertiated, meaning 1/3 of our people were wiped out during World War II. But the Roman, that term comes from the Roman Empire. They'd always wipe out 1/10 of a subordinate unit. But a nation would come in, conquer a unit. Many people would be killed, many would be exiled, and within a few generations, whoever was left would be completely assimilated. But that nation, as a nation, would cease to exist pretty much. So I don't know of any. Let's be nice and give it a 1 in 10, 1 in 10 chance of happening. That a nation would be conquered by a nation that they don't speak. Well, who in antiquity would usually conquer other nations? It was either world powers, in the case of Greece, Rome, Persia, right? World powers. And usually, like is the case today, where America is still, at least for the time being, the number one world power, right? We don't speak Chinese yet, but America is still the number one world power. So therefore, everyone in the world, if you want to be involved in commerce, you want to be involved in anything, you speak English. So either you're conquered by the world power, by the major world power, and you therefore usually speak that language, or you're conquered by a neighbor. And quite often you speak the language of a neighbor. But we were conquered twice, not once, but twice. Once by the Babylonians as they were in their rise to power, and once by the Romans as they were had already pretty much ascended to power. And even though the Jews were not so involved with the Babylonians, but we didn't speak Babylonian. The Jews were very involved with the Romans, and certain Jews definitely did speak Latin as they were very involved in Rome, but the Jewish people as a whole did not speak Latin. The lingua franca of Israel at the time, or Judah as it was called at the time of the Second Commonwealth, was not Latin. It was still Hebrew. It wasn't the language they spoke. So conquered by an unknown language, I don't know, let's give it 1 and 2. 50% chance of happening. Scattered throughout the entire world. How many nations in history were exiled from their ancestral homeland, scattered throughout the whole entire world? Again, usually within 1 or 2 generations, they're completely gone through either death, assimilation, or slavery, or whatever it is. How many are scattered throughout the world? I don't know. We'll give it 1 in 10, let's say. Let's just say. While in exile, having no organization, I think by this point, we definitely have no other nations. So we'll stick to our 1 in 10 number. And all of that to survive it all? Again, how many other nations are in this contest but us? How many ancient nations went through destruction, exile, by unknown languages, scattered throughout the world, with no organization, no unifying factor at that time, and still survived? I think we're the only ones. Let's give it 1 in 10. And in the end, to return to their ancestral homeland and return to the Almighty. My friends, I've said it a million times, I've said it once, and I believe I'd hazard to guess, because every time I guess it's a hazard, everyone watching this class has heard me say it at least once, that we are living through, like Rav Yaakov says, the most miraculous time in world history, because we are the ones who, with our eyes, can see this prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu, this prophecy of our teacher Moses, come true 100%. Our grandparents, every single one of our grandparents believed in this prophecy with complete faith. Because 1 had happened, 2 had happened, 3 had happened, 4 had happened, and 5 had happened. But 6? Go wake up any of your great-grandparents from the grave who were alive in the 18th and early 19th century and tell them that by the year 2021, the majority of the world Jewish population will be living in the land of Israel. They would look at you like they were from Mars, like you were from Mars. Now, they hoped and they prayed. Every time they said the Shemona Esrei, the silent Amida, they said, that we want to turn to Jerusalem, that Jerusalem's our city. They would daven, they would pray to the east, face Jerusalem. But the idea that it would happen, well, that's what King David describes in the great Psalm Shir HaMalos. What does he say? Shir HaMalos, that when we as Jews finally return to the land of Zion, land of Zion, we are going to be dreamers. Az Yamale Schek Pinu. Our mouths are going to be filled with laughter. You don't laugh. What do you laugh at? You laugh at the unpredictable. Like if I would say to you, well, the other day I was walking down the street, I bought a Coke, you might laugh because I don't really drink carbs, right? I don't drink Coke, but there's nothing funny about that. It's mundane. But if I would tell you the other day I was walking down the street, I bumped into someone, spilled my drink all over me and slipped and fell and, it caused a whole ruckus. That's funny because it's unexpected. Az Yamali Schok Pino, that when we return to Zion, our lips, our mouths will be filled with laughter because it's going to be so unexpected. If you would wake up your great-grandparents and say by the year 2021, the majority of the world Jewish population will be living in the land of Israel, and yes, they'll be on their 5th election. That's okay. It's okay too. But unbelievable. And then when I add on to that, the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu put it all in the Torah, that this is all right there in the book of Deuteronomy for anyone to read. If you want a different language, you can pick it up in Latin, German, English, whatever you want. But in plain Hebrew, it's right there to read. Miraculous. Unbelievable. David Gottlieb, one of my teachers, friends, and mentors, is a retired professor of mathematical logic from my alma mater, Johns Hopkins University, and he approaches a lot of concepts of Jewish philosophy from the position of a mathematical logicist. And he actually put a mathematical probability on this happening. And he said it has a 1 in 64,000 chance of actually happening. In other words, if I would stand today and make such a prediction, as Moshe made 3,000 years ago, and say, this is what's going to happen, it's a 1 in 64,000 chance of coming to fruition. And again, back to that idea we said before. If I want my book to be accepted as fact and not fiction, would I risk writing such a prediction? And dare I say, if you look at any comparison, does the New Testament have any such, detailed predictions? Does the Quran have any such detailed prescriptions? Do Joseph Smith's golden plates have any such detailed predictions? I don't think so, right? I don't think so. Because who would have the audacity to make such a prediction? Unless he had a connection to the one who was controlling the map of history. And that was Moshe Rabbeinu, and that's our relationship as a Jewish people. So when we study history, this is what we're studying. We're studying the history of the greatest miracle ever to happen on the map of history. Anyone who says they don't believe in miracles, open your eyes and study a little Jewish history. And every step of the way, you'll see miracles. as Rav Yaakov says, bigger and greater than those that happened in the time of the desert, in the time of Egypt, and in the land of Israel. As you know, if you have trouble recognizing this miracle, well, there's one of the most beloved of American writers, good old Samuel Clemens, aka Mark Twain, wrote it best in his famous article concerning the Jews from Harper's Magazine in 1899. Now, it's interesting, as I pointed out in a class that I had with my father and Jerry Harris last week, that one of the reasons Mark Twain wrote this article is because he was the victim of anti-Semitism. In other words, people thought he was Jewish and gave him a hard time because they thought he was Jewish. So he basically wrote the article to say, no, I'm not Jewish, but Jewish people are pretty great, and let me tell you why. And what's he write over there? He says, the Egyptian, the Babylonian, the Persian rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, then passed away. The Greek and the Roman followed. The Jew saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakness of his parts. All things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? My friends, the secret is our connection to the Almighty. Our secret is everything we've been talking about tonight. Our secret is the study of Torah. Our secret is enjoying this world, as the Mesilas Yesharim says, as Moshe Chaim Luzzatto says, through the ultimate enjoyment, which is a connection to the Almighty. And that's how we've made it this far, perpetrating and being a part of the biggest miracle ever to happen in the map of time. And the last piece of that is we have a concept called Maisa Avos Siman Labanim. That's how it's colloquially talked about in Jewish philosophy, which comes originally from the Medrash Tanchuma in Lech Lecha Os Tes, letter 9, where it says, Siman Nasan Lo Kodesh Baruch Hu LaAvraham, that the Almighty gave a sign to Abraham, Shekol Ma She'ira Lo Ira Labanav, that everything that happened to him will happen to his children. This is a concept called Maisa Avos Siman Labanim, which basically means that we can look at the stories that we'll study the first number of weeks together, the stories of our antecedents, the story of our forefathers and our foremothers, or three fathers and four mothers, whatever it was. And that is a harbinger for what we have to come after that. Now, the way that the Vilna Gaon explains this is that all of Jewish history can be found in the Torah. And the Ramban says this as well. There's a similar approach, Ramban and the Vilna Gaon. All of Jewish history can be found in the Torah. There's a concept in the Zohar and the writings of Kabbalah that says, Histakal Ba'araiso Bari Alma, that when the Almighty created the world, he first looked into the Torah and then created the world. So the Torah is the blueprint for the whole entire world. So through understanding the Torah, we understand Jewish history. And through understanding Jewish history, we understand the Torah. So that, my friends, is why we're going to study a little bit of Jewish history together over these next number of weeks. Because on one level, it's how we fulfill our purpose in this world. It's how we look into what those before us did, learn from what they did, both good and bad. It's how we figure out where we fit in. We're in that 6,000 years. We're in the process we see, already in that process of the actualization of the Jewish people, hopefully bringing back the Messianic era, And at least for Pinchas Landis, and hopefully for you at some level too, it'll be a strengthening of our emunah, a strengthening of our faith in the Jewish people and our faith in the Almighty. Because we just have to look at what's happened. Look at what's happened over these past 6,000 years. Look at the miraculous history. Look what we survived. We've not only survived, but we thrived through the 3,000 years since the giving of the Torah and the 6,000 years since creation. And then when I tell you that was all part of a prophecy from Moshe to the Jewish people before the end of his life, or with the Ramban and the Vilna Gaon's idea that it's all spelled out there in the Torah as a blueprint, that's when the miracle and the structure of faith that I believe Jewish history is really actualized. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank you for listening. I see there's a bunch of comments in the chats, and then we'll go to those first, and we'll see what else the Peanut Gallery has to say. Okay. Okay, Mikhail, doing and studying Judaism is, in our times, indeed a miracle. Modern day idolatry is a massive force on par with the worst in history. Right? Yeah, I agree. There's as one of my Rabbi Krohn, who is part of the 10 steps, he always says that we have many idols in our world today. Yeah, we don't have the Baal and the Asherah tree and all the idols from the time of Tanakh, but we have the American dollar, and we have certain philosophies that are definitely far from Torah philosophies, and the fact that we are, we're called, our original name as a people is the Hebrews, right? Hebrew is just, I don't know whoever came with that word Hebrew. I guess it's from Latin or Greek, but it's from Ivri, right? The Hebrew is Ivri because Abraham is called Avraham HaIvri, which comes from the word avar, which means the other side, because Rashi tells us, and the Medrash tells us, he was from the other side of the river. Everyone else was a polytheist. Everyone else believed in one thing. He believed in something different. So sometimes in history, we go with the currents of time. Sometimes we go against the currents of time. In many ways today, we're going in both directions depending on what's going on. But the fact that we're able to withstand that throughout history and we still sit down to study Torah ideas, regardless of if they are the ideas of the time or not, I agree, Mikhail, huge miracle. Okay, do Zoroastrians or Yazdins count as conquered people count? They weren't exiled though, so it's not a direct comparison. I mean, the Zoroastrians, I could be wrong, you can correct me. I don't think they were actually a people. I mean, they're different people who were Zoroastrians, right? Like the Persians were Zoroastrians, and there are elements of the Persians and elements of different empires. And I think the Zoroastrianism was the religion of the empire, but I think that many of those people, yeah, they were conquered and they're not here anymore. I mean, again, these, yeah, you might find a few here, a few there, but as far as a force in nature, I think many of them have passed on. The book of Daniel illustrates that the fourth kingdom of Rome will be in power until God chosen people resume power. 100% spelled out clearly in Daniel, and the Midrashim throw in. Again, we mentioned the concept of time to Belial before. The Midrash attributed to Elijah the prophet talks about how in the end of days that Rome will be in partnership with Ishmael, with Ishmael. In other words, the Arab world and the Roman world. By the way, Rome and America are the same now. What we taught to in Jewish philosophy is Rome. That's America nowadays. Well, we'll explain to that when we get to it. But it's we're not talking about Italy, right? We're not talking about Mussolini, right? We're talking about America. America has taken the mantle of what we in English call Rome, in Hebrew we call it Edom or Esav. And we'll explain how that works out historically. That's America nowadays. So the Midrashim. So Daniel is a book of Tanakh. He says it clearly, but the Midrashim add on to that Ishmael, our final struggle, will actually be with Ishmael. Will be with the Arab people. That they're going to be mixed up with Rome, and that's what we're going to have to contend with in the end. And that's a lot of what we are, again, the struggles that the Jewish people have today, for sure in the land of Israel and many ways outside the land of Israel. Great. Thank you so much, Deanne. Joanna has a Persian friend who's Muslim, but they still have, yeah, right. No, they're definitely Zoroastrian. The religion of Zoroastrianism still, to a certain extent, does exist. Yeah, 100%. Rome is Esav. Yeah, exactly. When we say the concept of Rome as Jews, we're not talking about Italy. We're talking about Esav, our cousin Esav, Uncle Esav. And we'll get to that within a few weeks. It's going to be covered early on. Okay, that's all from the chat box. Any other questions from the peanut gallery? Feel free to unmute yourself and chime in. Feel free to put in the chat box, whatever works for you. Okay. Well, from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you all for participating with us tonight. The outlines have on it both my email address and my phone number if you don't have it already. So you can for sure contact me at any time. I just want to throw up here the few save the dates that we have these next few weeks. I think Nomi had it before. Maybe Nomi can throw it on the screen. She gets it before I do. Nope, that's not it. Nope, that's not it. Oh, there she goes. Nomi has always got my back. First of all, on April 25th, just a few weeks from now, we'll have the Partners in Torah. We'll have the annual Partners fundraising event. It will be virtual this year. We were going back and forth and hoping the vaccine would get a little bit further, but it's going to be virtual. And our keynote speaker will be Yosef Altaiba, who is the United Arab Emirates ambassador to America. And we'll be having a conversation with him and Malcolm Hoenlein, the immediate past president of the Council of Presidents of major Jewish organizations. It's going to be April 25th. That will be a virtual event, and it'll kick off a 36-hour fundraising campaign where we're going to raise our whole budget for the coming year in 36 hours. It is a all or nothing campaign. Either we raise it or we lose it, and many of those dollars will be matched on that day. So stay tuned for more details about that. That's April 25th. Our next upcoming event, as Nomi's about to put on the screen for us, I assume. Okay, maybe not. But next week we will continue with the 10 steps. In the email, I believe all of you got the full schedule here. I'm going to take up a screen share because I actually have it here. Give me 1 second. Here we go. Here's the full schedule. And if you're not in our email, then I'm sorry. I think Nomi tried to share something and I messed it up. Sorry. Here we go. There it is. This is our full schedule. Now, by the way, I forgot to mention in the beginning, that this syllabus is nothing more than that. It's a syllabus. In other words, I'm not committing today to stick to this to a T. We might go a little bit faster than this, probably not. It might go a little bit slower, but this is roughly what the next 10 weeks will look like. The topics of the next 10 weeks. Next week will be in the beginning, understanding creation, then on to the creation of man, then on to the great flood, Abraham, Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, slavery, Egypt, and we'll end our spring series with an outstretched arm, talking about the Exodus, and then we'll go right into the summer series, which will pick up from there, because like I said, our plan is for this to be an ongoing class. If you didn't get this little flyer, it's in our email, but I will put it now in the chat box for all of you. Yeah, if there's any last minute questions, feel free to throw them out now. If not, I'll look forward, or feel free to reach out to me throughout the week, and I will look forward to seeing you all here next week.
Is this theory going to take 6,000 years?
No, not going to take 6,000 years. My guess is, honestly, it'll take about a year. Honestly, it'll be probably about a year.
Oh,
I think we do it about 52 weeks, maybe.
Well, if it's anything like today, it's going to be a treat. Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Thank you, Mikhail. I appreciate that, and I look forward to doing it together. And again, anyone who missed it here tonight, you can catch it. It'll be on Torah anytime shortly, and as all of our episodes will be. And I think that's all I have to say about that. Everybody have a great evening, and I'll look forward to seeing you all next week.
Sure. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.